The individual grows as the group gathers. Hi, I'm Louise from OTGrow YouTube channel, and welcome to our first episode of 2026. So, if you have a passion for group therapy and group facilitation, then this is the right place to be. So, we are talking today with Michael Fischer, who is our first guest for 2026. And we are going to be talking about Ubuntu. So, Michael was the brainchild behind the idea of how we bring the Ubuntu concept together with the interactive group model. And we have taken as our theme for this coming year for 2026 as the individual grows as the group gathers, which is a slight variation on the idea of Ubuntu, or I am because we are. So I'd like to welcome Michael to this episode.
Thank you for having me, Louise.
All right, so Michael, you came up with the idea of Ubuntu while you were doing your master's degree, the philosophy and ethics of mental health through the Mental Health Institute at University of Pretoria under Dr. Verdi van Staden. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So, um, yeah, the idea came to me when I was looking in practice um, to think about the ethics that would fit with the group. And I realized that a lot of the other ethical frameworks, normative ethical frameworks that we have, didn't quite fit the group dynamic. Either it um, put the individual at the center of the ethics, or it put the group above the individual. And so I was struggling to reconcile these two extremes, as it were, with group therapy, especially the interactive group model that sees the importance of the individual's growth, but thinks about the group's wisdom as a whole as well. Um, and in so doing, I remember there's a quote by Michel Foucault, which just a bit of a paraphrase here is something like Western philosophy has run its course. And if we are going to find a continuation in philosophy, we have to look elsewhere. And so I was thinking, ooh, maybe there's a African or a South American or a global South um, ethics that would work. And I was thinking about Ubuntu. And all of a sudden, it started making sense for me because Ubuntu has both the individual and the group at the heart of its ethic.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's also why I thought it was such a brilliant concept because so often in groups, like you said, either people lean to hold the whole group. So often your group processing, your art therapy, all of that, they hold the group together as in the process, or your psychodynamic groups. But the individual is a little bit lost in some of that. And in other elements like your CBTs and your DBTs, there's very much emphasis on the individual, and then the group gets lost. And so I think there's this amazing tension being held in the interactive group model where we are constantly looking at how does the individual impact the group and how does the group impact the individual, and being constantly aware of this tension playing out not only in the group itself, but in the individual, thinking, okay, when do I now lean in the group? I've got to let go a little bit of who I am, or maybe I've got to let go because of the greater good. And yet there are other times where I need to step in because I can impact the group in making a decision. But I'm wondering how you kind of conceptualized it. That's the way I've kind of made it my own, but how you've thought about it.
So when we talk about Ubuntu, it's important that we actually talk about what the term Ubuntu means.
Please.
So Ubu um, essentially means the act of being, and Ntu it means the person. So it's the act of being human or the act of being a person. Now, what's important to understand here, for people who haven't done a deep dive in Ubuntu, is that there are degrees of personhood when it comes to the African conception of the person. And so as you are growing, you are becoming more of a person or less of a person at any given stage. And so what's really interesting here is that in the group as well, we are becoming the persons that I almost want to say that we could be. We are going towards that self-actualization, and so we are becoming more persons within the group. And so, as you were saying, it's not that we necessarily let go of ourselves, but we actually are becoming ourselves within the group.
Sure. Oh, that is an amazing concept. That actually it's in its roots, I almost want to say, it kind of implies that we can only be fully ourselves or become fully ourselves when we are connected to people.
Yes, definitely. And so the group forms the person and allows the person to become their true selves, if you want to use that type of terminology, to become self-actualized. But at the same time, without the individual's participation in the group, another person can't become who they truly are meant to be. And so we've got this dynamic in Ubuntu that we are because I am, but I am because we are. So it's interchangeable in that sense. And so it holds again, the individual because the group is forming the individual, but at the same time, the individual is upholding the group and becoming part of the group and holding the group.
Sure, that is actually so beautiful because something you've just alluded to and kind of made me aware of is also the concept that in my becoming more me in the group, the other people are afforded an opportunity to become more themselves. So you have this incredibly beautiful, I almost want to say, incubator of people being allowed to become more of who they are. I've often, and I wonder what your take is on it. I often say that the group is where individuals can plug in and kind of almost become more of who they are because they're able to plug into something bigger. So, yeah, I wonder about your take on that.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that, and I think it's a notion that we see in almost African communitarian philosophy in general. This idea that the when the community is together, when the people come together, they are more than the sum of their parts in a certain sense.
Yeah.
They transcend in a certain sense, and so we can see this. Yeah, just in things like, for example, the hotla, for example, where you have the community coming together to discuss issues, to settle disputes. And so, yeah, the hotla becomes more than the sum of its parts because it becomes a place where when there are disputes, when there are um, kind of teachings as well. So as you say, it becomes a kind of an incubator, but it's always more than the group members. It's more than the collective. It transcends that in a certain sense. And so in that sense, I think it definitely comes back to what you were saying about the incubator. But again, not just that everyone becomes themselves, but they almost become part of something transcendental. The group becomes bigger than the group.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when I've kind of mentioned this Ubuntu, immediately people go, "Oh, it's such a wonderful philosophy, but it just doesn't work in practice." And in our next episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about how does that work in a group space. But yeah, so tell me a little bit about that criticism and where do you think things are not happening, or where is it falling apart when people do try to enact or implement the Ubuntu philosophy.
So, so the biggest kind of proponents against Ubuntu, in a certain sense, actually comes from an argument from inside the kind of Zulu culture, and the local culture. There was a article written by Martellino and Quidingui, that kind of says Ubuntu worldview kind of worked in a kind of pre-colonial society, but that it kind of starts falling apart because of corrupt leadership, in the sense of, now that we have, corrupt politicians, they only think about themselves to the detriment of the community. Or you have people like Jeche, that says the individual gets lost within the group. And so a lot of these criticisms of Ubuntu come from people who have grown up in that worldview. But I think what's starting to happen is that rather than necessarily subscribe to these pre-colonial understandings of Ubuntu, Ubuntu itself has evolved into something different. And some say that's a good thing, some say it's a bad thing. But I think the consensus at the moment is that even though, let's say, pre-colonial Ubuntu has lost its place, it doesn't mean that it stops being helpful, that we can stop using it. And so one of the big proponents of Ubuntu at the moment is an American philosopher at the University of Pretoria called Thaddeus Metz, who is looking at taking Ubuntu and turning it into an ethical system that we can use currently. But it's those key components that I almost want to say are timeless within Ubuntu, that we can extract and use. And I think one of the big things, especially within the society that we have, again, is either everyone goes towards a communistic or communitarian worldview, or they try and become more liberal and individualistic. And I think this is the beauty of Ubuntu, is that it's neither of the two.
Yeah.
It holds both within itself. And so that I almost want to say is the most important part of Ubuntu, is this tension, this dynamic between the we and the I.
And the group.
Which and the group. Well, the group is the we.
Yeah, sorry.
So no. But I think this is where we need to kind of talk about Ubuntu currently, is saying that, okay, maybe the old Ubuntu has died, which is Martellino's position. But I think, as Metz has demonstrated, like we can revivify it. And I think this is where my kind of master's thesis kind of came in, is by saying, okay, how do we revivify Ubuntu within the group space, or within the therapeutic space? And I think group therapy is the ideal
Mm.
place to revivify Ubuntu and
Mm.
actually make it that ethical orientation.
Yeah, and we'll discuss that in the next episode. But I think maybe just for our viewers to just say maybe for yourself to think, which way do you lean? Do you tend to lean more towards the group or the collective, or do you tend to lean more towards the individual and focus on what the individuals are doing? And how can you bring those closer together? How can you hold those tensions a bit more? Maybe just to finish off, I had somebody in one of our trainings, and we were talking about this concept. And I was thinking, how do we explain it on a very like a metaphorical basis? And somebody, actually, a therapist called Charles from Northwest, came up and said, you know what, for me, it's like being the color dark blue in a set of pencils. And I thought that was such a very good metaphor because by being myself, by becoming myself, by being okay with being the dark blue, I don't need to be all the other colors. And then being able to open myself up and realize I need everybody else to fill in the colors that I'm not. And I thought that is such a beautiful way to show how we hold the tension between we need each person to be an individual, but we also need everybody to collectively make this set of pencils, coloring in pencils, and then even we can start shading, bringing in colors that aren't necessarily there by mixing people and holding the whole collective. And I thought that was just a brilliant way to think of Ubuntu. Anyway, maybe a last word from your side, Michael?
Um, no, I think that's actually a perfect note to end off on. If I'm honest, it's a very good metaphor. And yeah, hope to see you guys in the next episode.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. In the meantime, happy facilitation.